Good morning, everyone. It's Joker, and today we're back with another slime video, part 2 of the gigantic team building guide that I did probably earlier today, because I'm going to upload both parts in one day, so it's not spread out too far. But we went over what each type of unit is, what each type of protector is, different, mechanics of how team building works. But today we're actually going to build teams as, they should work in a proper setting. Now, again, disclaimer, this is how I personally build teams, not how everybody builds teams, so just take it as a helpful guide, not as the Bible on building teams. But the first thing we have to talk about before anything else that I didn't get to cover in the previous video was the new EX protection forces. So, what this is if you've ever played Dokkan Battle or Dragon Ball Legends, you have categories, you have tags, right, that a number of characters fall under, and certain units will give you better stats. So, in the first video, Toa led fire and physical. Great, if you're a fire unit, you're getting a buff. If you're a physical unit, you're getting a buff. If you're under both, great, you're getting double buffed. But with the introduction of EX forces with Diablo, he was the very first one, he now adds a new layer into team building, because not only do you have to fall under the specific category, force, tag, whatever you want to call it, you do additional damage versus specific types of enemies. So, he increases damage done by Fount of Wisdom characters to water enemies. So if you're on the Fount of Wisdom category and you are fighting a water enemy, you will do an automatic 60% extra damage. And that's just forever. In any stage. Doesn't matter. As long as you're Fount of Wisdom and you're fighting a water enemy, 60%. And then, on top of that, if you are part of the Primal Demon or Fount of Wisdom force, you get 20% additional attack and defense. And that is a big jump from what Toa was giving down here, where she gave, fire attack by 12 and physical attack by 10, right? 22% attack if you were under both, but no defense at all. So, now when you're building teams, especially with EX category leaders, you need to take into account, are you in that force? Are you getting that extra 20% attack and defense? Are you going into a stage where you're going to get that massive 60% damage buff? Frey is the same thing. Diablo is a stacking protector. We went over what those are. Frey is a burst leader, and she leads World of Fantasy, and she does extra damage to fire enemies, and if you're on 10 Great Demon Lords or World of Fantasy, you get the 20% attack and defense. So, when you are pulling, and when you pull one of these characters, if you pull one of the older ones that don't have a force, it's not the end of the world, alright? Forces have been around only since February of this year, so really not that long. And the rest of the game always ran on, are you a certain typing, are you a certain, damage output, whether it's physical or magic. Just now have forces come into the game. So it is something that other people, even older players, are still kind of getting used to. So, let's build a force, let's build a force, right? So, Diablo, again, leads Primal Demon and Fount of Wisdom. So, you're going to want to take into account who is on a Primal Demon or who is Fount of Wisdom. And you can filter such things by force, so you can do Primal Demon and Fount of Wisdom. There it is. Alright, so, there you go. These are all the Primal Demon and Fount of Wisdom characters. Now, since every month characters specifically come out for each meta, it would make sense to put all of the meta ones together. So, Rimuru, Hinata, Albus, where is she? Albus. And then you could take your pick. Now, you don't have to have them be there, because you can have support units that don't actually fall into the category. It's just that they're not going to get the increased stats and the increased damage, which, for most part, is fine, because your nuker here is going to be Hinata. As long as Hinata fits under the force and gets the extra damage, and you're going into a fight where you get the 60% extra damage, it really doesn't matter what your other support units are, as long as they complement Hinata. Because Diablo is a stacking team, right, we have Rimuru, who is a dual orb changing and support character, because he orb changes, and he gives all allies physical attack. Alright, Hinata is physical. Hinata also gives everybody attack, plus she gives herself a 40% ult damage buff, and she's an orb changer. Alright, and then Albus. She gives everybody pierce and lowers pierce resistance across the board on all enemies, and she's an orb changer. These three units right here are perfect for each other because they allow you to buff the crap out of Hinata while also being significant orb changers to where you can get multiple stacks of Diablo. So that means that whatever other two units you want to put on are really up to you. Do you want more damage support? Let's take the force off. Let's reset this. What else can we put on this team? Well, we could put on Aqua, right? Technically, she's doubling up because she's giving Pierce, you're giving Pierce resistance, and you're giving Pierce power. So those are two separate buffs. No, she doesn't fall under the Force, but she will help the rest of the team out because she's going to buff Hinata, and she's going to be able to help rush Hinata's EX ult with her other skill. So she's actually a fine addition to this team. Let's talk about a not good addition to this team. Traya. Free-to-play Traya. She's a really, really good unit on a green-focused team. This is a blue-focused team. You have blue orb changers right here. You do not need a green orb changer. You don't want greens, because most of the time the stage you're taking them into nerfs green orbs. So Traya, not really a good fit. Guy could be a good fit, because he is an ult buffer across the board. He gives all physical allies crit, which these three characters plus him are physical, and then he is also another orb changer. So you're going to assist in the orb changing to get more stacks of Diablo, you're going to give all of your physical units crit, and you're also going to be helping them hit harder on their ult. So he would be a good pick. Megamine would also be a good pick because she's doing almost the same thing, minus the crit. Now, she would be considered a sub-DPS on this team, but that would be alongside, Albus and Rimuru, because she's not on the Force, right? She's here to help support Hinata and help support orb changing, but these two are not on the Force. But they can still assist the primary members, all right? So, let's cut now and let's make a bursty team. The supports down here, again, you're going to want the big three, so Gazel, Earth Milim, Dark Milim, and then underneath, well, you've moved to the back, but you get the idea. Let's move on to another team, minus the supports. Alright, the next example would be a physical fire team. We've used Toa in quite a few examples, so it only makes sense to use her as an actual example. So, she leads fire physical. Violet is the primary DPS that came out with Toa. She is fire and she is physical, so she is getting double buffed from Toa. But this is an orange-focused team. Toa changes 3 blues and 3 greens into 6 oranges, gives you 40 skill points, and buffs orange orbs. So, you're going to want to put a number of different units alongside Violet. Now, one unit that you could take use of, that even I don't have maxed out, is Light Hinata. Why? Because she converts to orange orbs. And that is exactly what the team is running on, is oranges. And she also raises defense, which is a cool ability. Defense raising only used in specific instances, but orange orbs can work. However, do you really need orange orbs when your converter is already doing most of the converting? Probably not. Bringing Hinata would be what I would consider maybe overkill, unnecessary for the team. Because orange orbs by themselves, they help you get your ult very, very quickly. But they don't do much anything else. They don't give you a lot of skill points. They don't give you a lot of protection gauge. And protection gauge is what you need to get the protector active. So it might be a little bit better to maybe bring a blue orb changer to help ensure that you can activate Toa as quick as possible. Unless the stage nerfs blue orbs, in which case can't really do that, but that's its own kind of thing. So Rimuru right here, he is a pure converter, right? He changes 2 greens to 2 blues, and he changes his own orbs to blues, which can be very, very impactful. Could you put him on this team? Yeah, you could. he's not damage output, but he certainly will help you get Toa very, very fast. The next slot. Now we're looking for damage support. And a good unit right now is Christmas Shizu, who also came out with Violet. Why is she good? Because she gives all allies an extra 50% fire attack, and then gives them pierce power. Guess who can use fire attack and pierce power? Violet. Excellent unit to put with her. Alright, moving on. Violet also has this wonderful ability called Burn, where you do an extra 20% additional damage based on the amount of damage you did during that turn using a fire character. It sounds very complicated, but it's just extra damage at the end when you're done doing everything. So you do 100,000 damage, and then the burn kicks in and you do 20k. It's pretty much as easy as I can do it. And it lasts for 3 turns. So awesome. Well, we can capitalize on that by bringing another unit who may also have burn, and that is the free-to-play hero right here. So what hero does is burns a unit and then lowers physical attack resistance on the enemy, which means that Violet, being physical, will hit harder. He also transfers 3 random orange orbs to the highest attacking unit, which should be Violet. So that's also more orb support for Violet, alongside another 20% stack of burn. So now we're up to 40%, combining both her and hero. Now, the final unit you can bring would normally be the other Benimaru that came out with this meta. He is an orb changer, but he's a very weird orb changer because he changes oranges to greens. I don't know why they did that. It's an orange meta. I don't know why they're changing away from oranges, but he also burns for 24%. So that's 60% burn damage right there. And then he has an instant damage, which does just immediate fire damage, and then increases orange damage by 50%, which is more damage support because Toa is making oranges. So theoretically, this team should run fine, right? You've got Violet as a DPS, you have orb support, orb support, orb support, you have damage support, and you have, small damage supports, and you have your primary converter being Toa. This would be an efficient team in most scenarios for most players. So, again, DPS, orb, damage support, orb damage, orb damage. So, another good example of team building. Okay, so here's an example of not good team building, or in my opinion, would not be a very good team build. We have Protector Guy. Guy changes 3 blues and 3 oranges to 6 greens. It's a very powerful skill. He then lowers the AoE resistance of everybody by 15%, and also just straight up gives you 35% ult gauge. That's a very powerful kit right there, and you can do a lot of things with Guy. But this team setup as it is does not work very well for him, because we have a blue orb changer, a blue orb changer, and a blue orb changer. Okay? We don't need that many blue orb changers on a green-focused team, because he is changing to greens. Guy is an alt buffer. Shuna is an alt buffer. You don't need 2 of them. They don't overlap. They just take the place. So Shuna is 70%, Guy is 80%. If you combine them together, you only get 80% because it'll take the highest one. So you don't need that. Guy is also giving all physical allies crit, right? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 physical allies here. Fire Milim also gives crit. The hero also gives crit. So while they are very powerful units individually, they don't need to be run together, because you're just now tripling down on giving people crit for no reason, because these can be easily replaced. And then Valentine here, she is space and physical, which Guy is space and physical. So you would think, oh, great, she's an excellent fit. However, she has very expensive skills, 70 points and 80 points. Guy doesn't raise your cap, which means you're only ever going to have, at max, 100 points to use. So trying to pair a high-cost unit with a protector that doesn't give you any additional points, not a good idea, because you're going to use the one skill, and you better pray that it's really good and it's going to kill, because you don't have time for anything else. So, not a good team combination. How would you solve this team? How would you fix this team? Well, we would bring some green-focused units, so let's say free-to-play Isis, right? She changes blues to greens and also gives green orbs 50% to all gauges, so their alt gauge, the protection gauge, and skill point gain. She is a very, very powerful free-to-play unit, and while you're saying, well, why do we need another orb changer if Guy is doing it? Well, you're not always going to have Guy active, right? So you need to prepare for some times where you don't have him, but you still need full hands of greens because you want to take advantage of having a 6-hand of green that's buffed by 50% everywhere. So bringing Isis is a good idea. Bringing the hero could work because she is space physical and she can give crit, and while a 55-point skill does seem expensive, you can still use a number of other skills alongside it. Bringing Valentine, though, is not a good idea because you really need a DPS, and so your DPS in this very specific team would be Space Leon, being space physical, and he has low cost skills, and he has his own alt buff, right? So bringing another unit that gives the entire team alts, while you can do it, maybe not the most efficient way of using your time. And then he also has, extra additional buffs that help the rest of the team do more damage alongside himself. So he would fit very well. Guy would not fit very well here. Again, he is changing to blue orbs, which is cool and all, but this is a green-focused team. So you have the blues covered, right? The two blue to 2 green. Maybe you want orange to green, so that way you can cover both ends and hopefully get yourself to a full 6-hand of green. Well, if that's the case, then you can bring, you could bring Water Soe. He has an orb change, double orange, double green. You could bring free-to-play, where is she? You could bring, free-to-play Sufia. You could bring free-to-play Aaron. They both have orange to green orb changes, and they'll help you cover that other side of the orbs in case you get very unlucky. And then as your third unit, Milim. Not really necessary here, because we're bringing Hero. Hero fits under the leader skill. She is giving crits already, so let's take her away, and let's add in another low-cost damage support. Or you could add in more orb changing. Now, there is such a thing as too many orb changers and not enough damage support, because you can change orbs all you want, but if you can't do damage, then you're going to be in the fight for a long time. So you could bring Trya, right? The goddess of green orbs. Do you really need to, though? I don't really think you need to in this scenario. What you could do is you could bring another unit, another cheap unit, that will help Leon do more damage. And one of those is going to be, part of his meta. It's going to be Velzard, or it's going to be, let's say, Rain down here. Rain does instant damage, which is cool. She also damages herself, which is not cool. But she also lowers base resistance and increases crit damage, which you have the hero who is giving crit, right? Leon is lowering a whole bunch of resistances, giving himself alt damage, and then the hero is giving crit. And then Guy is lowering AoE resistance by himself, so therefore you now have 4 different debuffs and at least 2 or 3 big buffs on Leon that will help him do extra damage, and her skills are relatively cheap. So you have an orb changer and an orb buffer, you have an orb changer, you have support, DPS, and then you have Guy who is being major orb change. This would be a fairly effective team. Alright, here's another team. So now we're going to break away from the conventional, let's put the correct unit with the correct protector, that the typings match and everything. This is a team where you're going to have 2 primary DPS units, but one of them is going to take charge, because we're building this team around Shuna. So Veldora is a very unique protector, because he's a stacking protector, but he's focused more on green orbs than anything, because he resets your skill costs every time you use him, and every time you use a skill, you stack magic attack. So up to 70%. Every time you use a skill, you get 5%, and then when you want to nuke, you use him again, you get that 70% massive attack buff, and then you hit very hard. And then he resets your skills, so if you use an orb change for 25 points, it's now 45 points. Well, you use Veldora, it's back down to 25 points. Awesome. And then he also increases your skill cap by 45 until the end of the fight. Now, the reason why he's not a blue focus protector is because that you need the points to use skills in order to get him stacked up. But he doesn't work like the other blue stacking protectors where he buffs green orbs or blue orbs by 100, 500% skill point. So that's why he's running on greens. So we're going to bring Isis as the green support, right? She's changing blues to greens, and she's giving that 50% support to green orbs. Dark Milim is doing double duty. She is a DPS unit by herself, yes. You could use her alone on this team, and she would run fine, because it's her team. Cool. She's orb changing. 1 orange and 1 blue to 2 greens. Great. She's also alt buffing the entire team, which is very helpful. Fire Milim is giving the entire team crits. Very powerful. And then Trya back here is being another green converter. So we have 3 green converters. We have 1, 2 damage supports, technically 3 from Veldora, and then we have Shuna, and that's going to be our primary DPS focus on this team, because she gives herself crit damage, and she gives herself light attack, which no one on this team does. So now we've got magic attack, light attack, crit damage, alt damage, guaranteed crits right here. So we've got 5 different buffs on Shuna alone, alongside having 1, 2, 3 green orb changers. This is an efficient team, because we can make sure the greens are always buffed by Isis, we can keep the costs low by using a whole bunch of skills and then using Veldora to reset everything, and we can make sure that Shuna is doing maximum damage by activating all of her stuff, because realistically, Shuna only needs someone to give her crit, which is what Milim is doing over here. Milim does have an orb change to blue, which is going against the team, but it's not enough to call her useless, right? We just don't use the skill. Or we do in a certain scenario where we need a low-cost skill so we can keep stacking Veldora's damage, right? Every time you use a skill, 5%. It's a 15-point skill. It's almost as cheap as they go. Why not? There might be a turn in the battle where you need a single orb change to blue. But this is an example of Shuna not being dark. She is magic, though, so she does kind of fit. But we're taking the spot of Milim, who would normally be the DPS on this team, and enhancing Shuna's damage output by a lot of buffs, while still having orb-changing support. Here's another example of a team that's not meant to be. So we've got a stacking protector, Shuna, who stacks Pierce Power and Stun Strike, and we have paired her with a team that runs mostly on greens, which isn't really the best thing for her. We have units with, low-cost skills, orb changing to greens, we've got Hero for the crit, and you would think that this would be a good team because we're getting Stun Strike and Pierce Strike and crits, and Milim is crit damage and attack buff, and we have permanent attack buff and alt damage. On paper, yeah, okay, you would look at that as a new player and be like, this is a very good team. This is not a very good team, because greens, by themselves, do not get a lot of protection gauge, and the whole point of having a stacking protector is to get lots of times to use her so you can stack up that power. And also, she's buffing blue orbs, right? These units are not blue orb changers, so already that's strike 1. Strike 2, and 3 technically, is that Shuna is stacking Pierce Power and Stun Strike, yes, but none of these units are stunners, and none of these units give Pierce. So you're stacking nothing right now. It'll show on their units that you're stacking Pierce Power and Stun Strike, but with no way to activate that, because you need a unit who gives guaranteed Pierce to activate Pierce Power. You need a unit that can stun to activate the Stun Strike. If you don't have that, all you're doing is stacking 40 points every time and getting buffs on orbs that you're not changing to on this team. So not a good use for this team. A better use for this team would probably be Frey, right? So Frey changes to green orbs, gives physical characters crit, of which Milim is crit, so you no longer need the hero because she's redundant, so you can replace her with another low-cost unit like the Hero 2.0, who increases your orb damage and also lowers the resistance of other enemies, and now you have a pretty decent team because you've got an orb change. She does have a big buff, but you can get away with that in certain scenarios. We have small cheap buff, orb changing to greens to cover the hands that we don't have Foray active. And then we have Milim and Shizu, who are both single orb changers, who both have low cost skills, and who have their own buffs that are also low cost, allowing us to use a protector that, you know, only has 140 points when you use her. 180 if you get really, really, really lucky. So this would be a much more efficient team than putting it with a stacking protector and praying that you can get stacks, because you're not buffing blues, you're not changing to, well, you're buffing blues, but you're not changing to blues, and there's no one here to activate whatever Shuna is trying to do. Now, there is a team that you could use Shuna with, and that is going to be this team. Alright? So this is one of my pre-built teams. It's a very good team. It's a team you'll see a lot, in a lot of videos, probably. So, Shuna is leading Light and Magic, alright? Light Magic, Light Magic, Light Magic. Raphael is our damage-dealing unit, because Raphael stuns the enemy, guarantees pierce rate, and also has a personal 40% extra stun strike, which will stack on top of what Shuna is doing. So, we have a Blue Orb Changer, Blue Orb Changer, Blue Orb Changer, support, damage support, light buff, damage support, alt buff, damage support, pierce and the stun strike, and the alt resistance down debuff. We have the hero, guaranteed crits, and we have Milim, who is giving attack and light resistance down, of which our DPS is light. So, not only are we having a lot of Blue Orb Changers, we are putting a lot of buffs onto Raphael, and we're also able to stack with Shuna, who is stacking Pierce Power and Stun Strike, which is then activated by Raphael, because Raphael gives Stun and Pierce. So this is a very, very efficient team setup right here, because we've got the trifecta of what we need. We need Orb Changers, we need damage support, we need a DPS. All you need now is a Protector, and we've got one in Shuna right here. This is a very common team. You'll see it in a lot of videos, I promise you. Alright, and the last team that I'm going to, build, show, is going to focus on a very old Protector, an OG Protector, but still actually kind of powerful for what he does. Cabby, who leads Space and Wind, so yes, that's cool. So if you can build a Space or Wind team, then by all means go ahead. However, because of what he does, it doesn't really matter what he leads, because he's just going to work. So he raises your skill cap by 40, just like most stacking Protectors, but also increases all soul skills, which are green orbs, gauge increase by 150% for 3 turns. So a green orb will give you 150% extra ult gauge, extra skill points, and extra protection gauge. And if you send 6 green orbs, you're going to get, double everything in 1 turn. And he lasts for 3 turns. And if you send 6 greens, you're going to get him again, and again, and again. So, this is very much a leader that needs a green-focused team. However, the one caution I have is bringing Isis, because Isis is an orb changer to greens, which is great. But her second skill, all soul skills gauges increase by 50%. This won't matter, because Cabby is already doing it by 150%, so this will not be in effect. It is not magically 200%. It is still 150, because Cabby takes precedence because his buff is higher. So, don't bring Isis on this team. You want to bring other green-focused units like Traya, because she's really good at converting to greens. So you put her on here, and I wouldn't say single-handedly, but she can handle most of the orb-changing duties by herself. But then you can focus on putting other units that either change to greens while also giving some massive support, like Dark Milim. She also is a special converter to greens, while also being an alt buffer, and she can function as your DPS on this team, because Cabby isn't really raising anything else except skill cap. So whoever you put on the team, whatever buffs you place, it's going to be built around whoever you decide is going to be your damage dealer at that moment in time. So, another green-focused unit you could put on here, let's take a look, we have a lot of blues. You could put Valentine. She is another special green converter, also a healer. It would help, it means you'd have unlimited greens almost, but it doesn't really help your damage, so you're not going to kill things very quickly now. So maybe caution against that. Green, like Bride Xion. You can use her. She has a single orb change to green, and she's got Pierce, so you could put her on here. She does need someone to activate her Pierce, though, so because you won't be really running low on points, you could bring Raphael, who would give her Pierce, and also ult resistance down. You could bring, let's see, well, where is she? You could bring Dark Xion. She gives guaranteed Pierce and 20% extra Pierce power, which then doesn't go well with Bride Xion's own Pierce power, so you could not bring her. So there's an example of why you shouldn't bring Dark Xion, but you could bring Water Alice. She is also an orb changer from blues to greens, and she covers Pierce and lowers water resistance too. So I mean that's cool. I mean you can bring her. So all right, and the final slot. Who can the final slot be? You could make that literally anybody at this point. You could do Sokka if you have Sokka. You could do. Let's see. Who could you do all the way down here that I don't have done? If Dark Milm is going to be your DPS, then you could bring Shinsha. If Bride Xion is going to be your DPS, you could bring Light Leon, because he's got his 50% light buff. And so now, all of a sudden, you have an ult buff, you have an attack buff, you have Pierce power, you have Pierce rate, and you have a light buff. And this team should work functionally very well, because you have 1, 2, 3, 4 orb changers to help you get more greens, to get more cabbie, to get more points, to get more gauge. So this would be a team that, could function in most generalized content, except for like the super difficult fights that require very specific teams. This team can probably clear most anything, because even if the stage nerfs green gauges by like 50%, you're still going to get an extra 100 from cabbie, so he doesn't really care, and that's why he's still rather powerful. And then as far as, supports are concerned, you can use the big three down here. So Xion is light, so you could put Gazel with her. Milim is dark, so you could put the other Dark Milim with her. Dark Milim. And then Traya down here is fire, so she's not going to fit. But we can put Earth Milim under her, and that's the big three covered for protection gauge. So you start with half cabbie already done. And then over here, you can put other water units if you want. You could put Aqua, and then you can put, the Raphael that you may or may not have, or Shuna you may or may not have, or even free-to-play Sokka down here. That way they're just a little bit stronger and can survive long enough for you to stack up the points you need to send 1, 2, 3, 4 buffs at a time. So, and then the support slot, if you're going to be using Bride Xion as your unit, if you have Bride Shizu, she's light and physical. She's going to buff Xion, who's light and physical. She's also going to buff Leon a little bit, because he's light. She's going to buff Alice, because she's physical. So, I mean, this is a competent team. This team should work, in theory. And depending on the content you bring her into, it'll work really well. So that's the last team. Cabbie, very generalized protector, but focusing on greens. You could put anyone under him as long as they're a green team. But this is the part 2 for the team building video. Part 1 was the what units do and why you should put them together. This is team building guide. Hopefully you found this helpful. Let me know in the comments if you need something else from this. But yeah, that's it for me. Take it easy, and I'll see you all later.